Okay, welcome to the new White House press briefing room. I know you have a lot of questions about why we moved you, and we are not going to get into those at all today. So all you really need to know for now is that we've booked this meeting room at this Denny's for the next 4 years, and we do ask that as you enter and exit, you be respectful of the dining experiences of the people who are out in the main dining room.
Maggie Haberman, New York Times.
Shut up! Now, first order of business is the distribution of today's alternative facts. Let me emphasize, alternative facts are your friends, not your enemies. Learn them. Love them. Okay, here goes. 27 is the biggest number. The Dalai Lama is a domesticated South American camel. BuzzFeed is an astronaut, not a news site. Hillary Clinton and Madonna are the same person. The War of 1812 was fought for the right to party. Rain is the tears cried by Santa Claus. Penguins kill more people than gun violence does. Okay, that's it. We are done here. This is a one-time thing, but just to get off on the right foot, I'm going to pass out coupons for 10% off your entree here at Denny's.
Excuse me.
What is it? Who is it?
Jim Acosta from CNN.
That's not your name.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't.
Ow.
Your name is Reek. You understand me? Or should I say, do you understand me, Reek?
You'll never get away with this.
We get away with everything. Meanwhile, here are some alternative facts about the show you're about to hear. It's hosted by an Amish woman. She's 87 years old. She didn't attend the Women's March because, well, she loves America. And now, Colin McEnroe.
So apparently I'm an Amish woman. I can live with that, at least for the next hour. So we're going to be talking right now about, I don't even know what to call this anymore, but really kind of the battle over facts anyway, that has already sprung up in the very short time that President Donald Trump has been President Donald Trump. In the second segment of our show, we'll have some reflections from people who marched in the March on Washington. And in the third segment, I'm going to take your phone calls. I think you've probably got a lot of things you'd like to get off your chests. But joining us right now, we are so fortunate to have with us Margaret Sullivan, media columnist for the Washington Post. Her take on the weekend's events and the skirmishes between the press and Sean Spicer is called The Traditional Way of Reporting on a President is Dead, and Trump's press secretary killed it. Margaret Sullivan, welcome back to our show.
Thanks so much, Colin. Great to be with you again.
In the past, when the press and an administration have arguments about the truth, there's always kind of a sense that maybe the whole truth isn't being told, things are being concealed, maybe the president or someone is saying something that's not entirely true, and it's up to the press to kind of figure out whether it's true or not. So in blunt terms, did the president have sex with that woman? Or, in a more global sense, are the body counts from Vietnam accurate? There are all kinds of things like this, that part of the function of the press is to sort of say, well, is that the truth? Is there more investigation that we need to do? I think what the press is not accustomed to is what we saw this weekend, where there are just things right in front of people that everybody can look at in exactly the same way. And then to have an administration say those things are not as they appear to be. Is this, as a paradigm, kind of different somehow?
I think you've expressed it so well. A lot of people are reminding me of the Groucho Marx line, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Yeah. Things like crowd counts actually can be difficult to pin down. And we don't know exactly how many people were at the inauguration and how many people were at the Women's March. But I think what we can say is that the press secretary's statement, very definite statement that there's never been more people who have attended an inauguration, and he's added period, it is false, because we can see pictures that seem to deny that. We can look at, comparative metro numbers that seem to belie that, and the kind of the assertion of something as true, which we're pretty sure does seem to be a new reality.
Yeah, so we have a disparity sometimes almost by a factor of 10. Although I will say, by the way, I will join you in saying that crowd counts are difficult. They've gotten easier now that there is, there's even a whole subspecialty called crowd science. I'm so old that I covered a conclave that elected Pope John Paul I. And in fact, some of the major news organizations, as they looked at the funeral of Pope Paul VI, which had preceded the election of Pope John Paul I. Their guesses about how many people were filling up the Piazza San Pietro and the Via della Conciliazione that stretches back from it, they did differ by a factor of 10. So when you've got, crowd scientists saying 180,000 and Donald Trump saying 1.8 million or whatever it is, I mean, that's not unprecedented. But I think, well, first of all, let's hear Sean Spicer at this infamous press briefing.
Photographs of the inaugural proceedings were intentionally framed in a way, in one particular tweet, to minimize the enormous support that had gathered on the National Mall. This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe. Even the New York Times printed a photograph showing that a misrepresentation of the crowd in the original tweet in their paper, which showed the full extent of the support, depth, and crowd and intensity that existed. These attempts to lessen the enthusiasm of the inauguration are shameful and wrong.
So you've got a motive assigned, too, which is to lessen the enthusiasm. One of the things that we're seeing is kind of a declaration of hostilities very early on. I mean, usually it's, a month or two before the marriage starts to fall apart. This also seems odd, the ascribing of these very negative motivations.
Right, but I think there's something going on here that is not new. Even though, of course, we're in a new administration and President Trump has only been in office for a couple of days, this tendency or this sort of a tactic of calling the press your enemy, and is something that's been around in the Trump campaign and during the transition. It was very clear. He blacklisted news organizations. He referred to reporters as scum. This was absolutely a technique that was being used, and I think to good effect, because the people that he is appealing to, his base, are deeply distrustful of the mainstream media, and so he's setting them up as an enemy, and it is for a political purpose.
And then the question becomes, how does the media respond in such a way as to be effective without necessarily falling into his trap, right? One of the questions I think everybody's wrestling with right now is you don't want to try to out-Trump Trump in terms of aggression and hostility. On the other hand, you don't want to let things stand that are obvious canards.
And I think there is a way forward here that makes a lot of sense, which is Trump may call, as he has, the media his enemy, but we cannot treat him as our enemy because we, the nation's press, actually represent the public. And, so when we're in the briefing room or whether we're at our desks doing an investigative story or whatever it is, we're trying to get the message out to American citizens so they have the information they need to do their job of being citizens. So we have to just sort of concentrate on doing our jobs as fairly as possible, but also not be afraid to call out lies and falsehoods when we see them, and we're seeing them.
Is there also a sense that, one of the criticisms of the press during the campaign, particularly some of the cable news networks, is just kind of these kind of live feeds from Trump rallies or live feeds from Trump pressers, or just kind of letting him drone on and on and on and not ever breaking away. And it'll be a little bit different now, but you kind of wonder whether it makes sense to tilt away a little bit from the dependence on the daily briefing. Not that you ignore it, not that you don't pay attention to the statements that come out of the White House or things that are said, but it seems as though it's pretty obvious that the story lies somewhere else, and that as big, important news organizations like the Washington Post decide how to allocate their resources, allocating a lot of your resources in a way that's not dependent on the White House briefing room makes a certain amount of sense, or doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does, Colin. I think you've nailed it there. I was interested to see Jay Rosen, who's a really important thinker on press matters. He has a hashtag now, send the interns. He's suggesting that you send your most junior people to the press briefings because the real work, as you say, is not going to be happening at briefings, especially if they're going to be a cascade of lies. The real work is going to come in investigating and digging and doing more meaningful stuff. So we're moving away from what might be called access journalism, which is, you're close, you're there, and you're getting your information from being in the room, to accountability journalism. Not that hasn't always been important, but I think it has just become more important.
I think in a lot of people's minds, there's this notion of what happens in these briefings and what happens at press conferences. A lot of it might be located in. There have been a few hallmark moments. There was the moment when Nixon asked Dan Rather, "Are you running for something?" And Rather said, "No, Mr. President, are you?" Things like that. But those are outliers. And in a way, there's a mythology, that if you sit there and people watch shows like The West Wing and now Veep, I guess, is maybe even a more accurate representation, and think, well, that's where all the news happens. But it seems to me one of the things the Post has illustrated again and again in its coverage is, no, the news is not happening there. It's like Mandrake the magician. You're being invited to look at something that's very interesting while the hidden hand is doing something else.
That's absolutely true. The news is not going to be happening at these news conferences. In some ways, they're a distraction. And even all of this discussion of the crowd size is an incredible distraction. It actually helped take away the public's attention from, for example, what's happening with the Affordable Care Act repeal. It took attention to some extent away from the Women's March, and I think that's by design. It's the same thing, I think, as with President Trump's tweets. We can't really ignore them altogether, but we don't have to treat each one of them like a 5-alarm fire and come, with sirens screeching every time there's a statement which may, in fact, be a false statement.
And meanwhile, I think calmly correcting the record is useful. We saw Chuck Todd do this on Sunday. Let's hear a clip of him with Kellyanne Conway.
And you did not answer the question.
I did answer your question.
No, you did not. You did not answer
did.
the question of why the president asked the White House press secretary to come out in front of the podium for the first time and utter a falsehood. Why did he do that? It undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office on day one.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The one thing he got right was Zeke Miller. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
All right, maybe that wasn't so calm. I don't know. Was that, obviously a lot of things came out of that exchange, including sort of a hashtag, alternative facts is now a hashtag and a watchword and lots of other stuff. Was that a useful exchange, Margaret?
Well, I think this is something we've heard a few different times in a few different ways from either Trump or his immediate circle, which is, well, we have a different way of looking at that, and it's just as valid, which sort of undermines the idea that there is such a thing as verifiable truth. Now, it's not always easy to get at it, and facts can be challenged. I think that Chuck Todd did a good job of pushing back there. I'm not sure that Kellyanne Conway, in all fairness, meant to say, well, there are 2 sets of things and you can take your pick. I think what she was saying was, we see it differently. I disagree that that's a reasonable approach. As I say, I believe in truth, and I think that you have to go after it and not just sort of present something Orwellian. It's kind of doublespeak, and we all need to dust off our copies of 1984, I'm afraid.
That's actually our show tomorrow, believe it or not, is which fictional dystopia are we actually living in right now? So we'll come to that. Yeah, no, I do hear in Chuck Todd, I think everybody is trying to find a Joseph Welch moment, in the end, sir, have you no shame? Have you no shame? And a lot of times the Trump administration answer is kind of, well, no, we don't. Let's move on. That kind of indignation doesn't necessarily work. And I wonder if the other thing that we saw this weekend is kind of just letting them do their thing and then reporting on it may be enough. And so we saw him go to the CIA headquarters and put on this really kind of remarkable performance, standing in front of this memorial wall that honors agents who gave their life in the field, and really kind of talking about himself and how many Time magazine covers he's been on and about his uncle who went to MIT, and kind of ramble in this self-obsessed, aggrandizing way. I wonder if maybe, in terms of his actual public representations of himself, while the David Fahrenthold types are out there digging up all kinds of other interesting stuff, in terms of his public behavior, maybe just reporting on it's good enough.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we know that his approval ratings are very low for an incoming and now in office president at the very, very beginning of his term. I think that even some of the people who voted for him went into that voting booth not crazy about him, and now, I think they're seeing a little bit more. So I'm not sure that this constant self-aggrandizement that you're describing so well is really a great technique. It may play to his base of most core supporters, but I think for people who are a little bit more reasonable, they aren't liking it too much.
I think also, I mean, one of the questions that I have all the time is how hysterical to get about things like this. In a different kind of environment, if the leader of a country goes into the intelligence headquarters of that country. I mean, imagine if this happened in Egypt. If the leader of the country went into intelligence headquarters and then denigrated the free press and said, basically, these people are a bunch of liars. In fact, let's hear just clip A3. This is a little bit of Trump at the CIA.
The reason you're my first stop is that, as you know, I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. Right? And they sort of made it sound like I had a feud with the intelligence community. And I just want to let you know, the reason you're number one stop, it is exactly the opposite. Exactly. And they understand that, too.
Just to be clear, the people who are clapping and cheering are Trump people that he brought along with him to make that kind of noise. But, I mean, I don't want to be the hysterical person in the room, Margaret, but really, if we saw this happen in some other kind of society, the leader of a country going into the intelligence offices and saying, I have a running war with the press, it is the kind of thing that gets your antennae up. I mean, I think there are enough safeguards in this country so that we don't have to get concerned yet, but it was a rather odd thing to do.
It is, and the the thing is, there's just so much of this that's outside the norm that it becomes a little bit hard to get outraged every time, and I'm not sure that even serves a purpose. I think we have to acknowledge it, report on it, show that it's very strange, and move on to the more important things. But I actually am probably a little bit more worried than you are about what the long-term effects of this may be. It's very concerning to me, and I think that the war with the press, while it serves Donald Trump's political purposes, is dangerous in many ways.
Yeah, and I think the question is, by the way, I probably could match you worry for worry, but I think the question is, how does the press maintain its good faith and its reputation, in a situation like this? You've got a president who is going to, and who has, in a way that's been very personally profitable for him, he's going to attack the press. He's going to try to build up his own credibility by tearing down the credibility of the press. And I think, one of the questions is, how do you maintain the reputation of the press in an environment like this? I mean, one really good answer is to put your nose to the grindstone and do your job. And that may be the only answer, but it is, I guess when you say that you have worries, I assume one of your worries is, what's the effect of daily or nearly daily attacks on the credibility of the media?
That is a worry of mine, and I agree that the best answer we have is to do our work as well as we can and as fairly and as fearlessly and as responsibly as we can. But at the same time, again, it's really important not to be hysterical and to kind of calm down and do it properly, and at the same time not to just shrug it off and say, oh, well, we're over here doing our jobs and whatever happens over there is not our doing. But I do want to bring up that although mistrust in the press is at a high level, it's also true that since the election, the New York Times has signed up 200,000 more digital subscribers. The Washington Post has seen a flood of support. Places like ProPublica and news literacy outfits are seeing a lot of interest. I think that many people are realizing that this is an important hinge point in our nation's history, and they need to be well informed. So that's where we come in.
I'm one of them. $99, Margaret. That's what I had to pay just to be able to read your work. $99.
Thank you so much. That is deeply appreciated. I hope to make it worth your while.
You already have, and you certainly made it worth
Thank
our
you.
while asking you to be on the show today. Margaret Sullivan from the Washington Post, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
We'll talk again soon. Let's take a break. When we come back, let's talk about that other event in Washington this weekend. That would be the Women's March. We'll have two voices from that march joining us.
When I take power, Jack, there'll be some changes, see. When I've bagged Jack the presidency, what are facts, Jack? I tell you day is night. If you like Jack, you can say I'm right.
All right, those are our voices collected by Lara Herskovich, one of our guests today at the Women's March on Washington. Lara will be joining us in just a second. Also joining us right now, Lucy Gelman, reporter at the New Haven Independent and a host at WNHH Radio, also in New Haven, most importantly, a frequent panelist on The Nose. And she was one of the people down there in Washington. First of all, Lucy, welcome back to our show.
Hey, Colin, how are you?
Well, I'm just fine. I actually did catch a minor cold. I caught a cold when Donald Trump won the election, and I got a cold when he got inaugurated. Clearly, there's a war going on against my immune system, and I know who's waging it.
Man.
But that's the least of our problems. So, first of all, maybe you can just give us a sense. It's one thing to watch this stuff on television or read about it in the newspapers. It's another thing to be there. What was your overall sense of this event? And maybe one thing I would ask a little bit more specifically is, when there are rallies to end the Vietnam War or to gain voting rights and other civil rights for African Americans, there's kind of a clear objective. And one of the questions about this march was, did it have a clear objective and did it need one?
Yeah. So first of all, and I think Lara will probably say this when she joins the conversation, it was tremendous. I had a moment of maybe panic. I'm not great with crowds, and so there was a rally beforehand where kind of things were at a standstill, and literally bodies were just everywhere you looked. And but when I got beyond that and women were marching, it was really amazing. And part of that was because literally everywhere you looked on the National Mall, you saw not just people, but hordes. I mean, streets and streets and streets full of people, and specifically of women. That said, I think your question of, is there an objective here? And if so, what is it? Is a really interesting one. And I think when we talk about the march and then beyond that, what's next, I think people who are making a commitment to fight for rights have to think about what being in this fight means. And so, of course, Black Lives Matter is also a feminist issue, is also a reproductive choice issue, is also a LGBTQ and Latinx issue, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think Lara Herskovich is ready to join us now. Hi, Lara.
Hi, Colin. How are you?
Just fine. So Lara Herskovich, a touring singer, songwriter, poet, activist. Boy, this is getting to be like a Carolyn Payne introduction. Poet, activist, and juvenile justice reform advocate. Lara, one way to look at this whole event was as a counter-inauguration. That, okay, so you get a bunch of people here to cheer you on while you get inaugurated. Let's see how many people we can put on in Washington the next day who are considerably less enthusiastic. Was that the essence of what this event felt like, or did it feel like something else?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was a really, it was just a terrific experience. And I would say it's a both and. It for sure, I think overall is framed as, it's a both and. So there were definitely signs and feelings and opinions that were anti, not just this particular new administration, but all of the things that it has awoken in America, being xenophobia and or empowered, rather. Racism, Islamophobia, transphobia, environmental destruction, and all of that agenda. At the same time, it was framed very, very, very much as a progressive platform for positive change in amplifying the work that has been going on since the founding of this country, continues to go on today around, intersectionality and diversity and protecting human rights and reproductive rights, environmental protection, LGBTQ. So it was both. It was certainly both. But I don't think America and all of the people who were fighting for all of those freedoms we were all doing that work 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and we're all doing that work today. And we all, I think, clearly now understand that we need to turn up the volume and turn up our efforts in connecting with each other to unify in order to make this country healthier in all of those ways.
Right. So, Lucy, I used to buy wine from this Greek man who used to tell me he was from Greece, and he used to say, in America, the people are afraid of the government. In Greece, the government is afraid of the people. And his argument, and you see it across a lot of European, in Paris, you can get hundreds of thousands of people in the streets if you raise metro fares too much or something. And so I guess one of the questions is this kind of activism replicable? To have it happen once the day after the inauguration was very impressive. But if in fact one of the things it was sort of a show of force, not an aggressive or violent show of force, but like, here's how many basically happy, well-spoken, nice people we can put into the nation's capital, with a snap of our fingers. Can it be done again?
Well, the answer is I hope so. And one of the interesting things is I think that it will be interesting to see if, for instance, the People's Climate March on Washington has, an unprecedented number because a lot of the folks got involved in this march, and so that's in April. But I think maybe what's more important is the number of people. So I was genuinely worried about going and hearing from a lot of women, okay, I showed up at the march, I've done my part, now I can go home and sort of be happy and look back at Instagram and Facebook at this wonderful thing I did. And what I heard from women over and over again was, this is just day one in what needs to be a 2-year fight before the midterm elections and then a 4-year fight during Trump's presidency. So we're not seeing 8 years of Donald Trump. And so I heard a lot of people who said, I'm going to do this, but then I'm going to go and call my legislators, or I'm going to run for local office. I do think, though, when you bring up the question of just bodies being in one place, it kind of speaks to a sign that I saw that said, all the white ladies here, thanks for being here. I'll see you at the next hashtag Black Lives Matter meeting. And so I do think it is this question of showing up. And, okay, if women showed up for this, are they going to show up again?
Yeah, Laura, I would like to hear you respond to that, too.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And, I've been, as we all have, thinking about social movements and change and evolution and so on, and how do we amplify that? How do we make that happen more quickly? It was really impressive to see, right? So I've often thought, I don't know that we've ever had this conversation, but I've often wondered what it would take for humanity to unite. And I sort of joke that we need an aggressive alien invasion in order for human beings to finally see through the lens of what we have in common, instead of always seeing through the lens of how we oppose each other and how we're different from each other. Because we have much more in common, of course, than we do differences. And watching movement building through the lens of gender, and I know that gender is not binary, and we're all learning how to be responsible, how to do intersectionality in a responsible way. We're kind of learning in real time. So I don't mean to talk about gender in an insensitive way to the LGBTQ community, or to the trans community rather. But looking at all of the movements under the much larger umbrella of gender and through the women's lens was a really powerful thing to see. And it means we're going to bump up against each other, and we're going to sort of see where our necessary learning spots are. But I really it reminded me of the climate march that I went to in New York, the last one, where they created a very big umbrella, but under that umbrella, one could identify with. In my case, I marched with the musicians. There was a music block, and there were all of the different communities were welcomed as a sub-community under this larger umbrella, and I'm really hopeful that going through the lens of, think about your mother, there were men there that I would have never, I imagine, seen at marches, sort of fraternity-looking white young men wearing red baseball caps that were in the same font as the Make America Great Again that would say WTF America, and holding up a big sign that they made themselves as they were smoking their hookah pipes saying, "I'm marching for Mom." So I liked the way the movement is being framed as having, what was the language they used, decentralized, leaderful structure. That it's really being framed as we're not waiting for the 1 or 2 or 5 charismatic leaders to get us there, but we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And it's up to us, and feeling more connected because everyone has a mother or a sister or a spouse, or, everyone is, I presume, connected to women. And so it's a much more inviting kind of framework.
And by the way, those are called bros, the people that you saw.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Lucy, this point has been made by lots of people, and I'm sure it crossed your mind at the march too. That there's sort of a weird irony here that the march was made up much more of white women than of anybody else, and then a majority of white women voted for Trump in November. That there's some way in which there's obviously a tremendous sense of unease in the ranks of women about what this incoming administration means. On the other hand, there's some other way in which this message resonated with exactly that demographic, at least well enough to put them over 50% with women. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
So do you mean specifically, Colin, the white women at the march?
Oh, not at the march, no, but it just sort of, I guess, when we see the march for what it is, I mean, probably especially a heartfelt expression of women's concerns about what this administration means to them, there just seems to be kind of an odd disconnect with the fact that, more than 50% of women voted for Trump.
Yeah, well, I think one of the major takeaways, and organizers of the march and women were saying this, women, especially women of color, were saying this before the march, that a number of white women, especially white women who did not vote for Donald Trump, and I am certainly in that category, need to take this opportunity to sort of step back and open their ears and acknowledge that while allyship is a wonderful thing, implicit bias is also something that all of us deal with. And then I think it's incumbent upon them and upon me, I guess, more personally, to talk to white women and to engage in discussion with some white women who voted for Donald Trump. One of the things I thought a lot about during and after the march, especially because on Friday, I had seen demonstrators get tear gassed by police, and I was really nervous going into the march on Saturday that some violence was going to happen. And, I was thinking about the absence of snipers, the absence of water cannons, of mounted police with batons. And I think there is, it's not a coincidence that a large portion of the crowd looked like well-meaning soccer moms with pink foot warmers on their heads. And police maybe felt a little more at ease there. Luckily I didn't hear folks saying, for instance, this is my Selma moment, because I think my response would have been, no, this is not your Selma moment. This is something entirely different.
Lucy, I love the fact that you asked our producers in advance whether it was okay for you to say pussy hats, and then you just called them pink foot warmers. Even after we green-lighted it.
Yeah. Yes, there were lots of pussy hats.
So we appreciate your deference, or whatever that was. Lara, I think the point that Lucy's making is an interesting one, which is, as you say, it would be great if, ideally not due to some kind of Independence Day type alien invasion scenario, we could see past our differences to our common goals and our commonness. But we don't do that very well. And in some ways, we have any group of people has trouble seeing another group of people for what they are, and there may be even dissonances between the white women who were there at the Women's March and the people like that sign that Lucy was talking about. Will I see you at the next Black Lives Matter meeting? And maybe the other part of it was what we were just talking about too, which is you also do need to figure out somehow or other what was going on with all those women who voted for Trump. What did they think that they were going to get? And I don't know, is that part of the next step, sort of, figuring out who those people are and why a very different kind of message reached them?
I do think it's part of the next step. I think there are a lot of next steps, and I agree with what Lucy said earlier, that it's our job to also not be overwhelmed by all of the next steps, and it's incumbent upon all of us to find our entry point, find our skill set, find our passions, and just enter somewhere. I was listening just last night, driving back from D.C., to Vincent Harding, civil rights elder, on the Great American Experiment, and it's really our challenge and our opportunity to figure out how to thrive in a very, very diverse society. So I focus a lot of my advocacy efforts on juvenile justice reform, criminal justice reform. Of course, this massively impacts our communities of color. And so we really need to figure out how to, again, I know the intersectionality conversation is, I think, I haven't caught up on all of the conversations from the weekend, but really focused on gender and binary and the trans community. But we also need to figure out the intersectionality with sharing power, all of us, with the communities that are most directly affected. So those of us who are juvenile justice advocates, criminal justice advocates, yes, we need to reach out to those on the fence who I think are experiencing a whole lot of buyer's remorse. There are some who I think are never going to see or disagree with where the administration seems to be leading us. And there are lots of people who I think are, I heard a lot of people talking about giving them a soft landing, and saying, like, welcoming them to the movement, because really this is the revolution that we're talking about. And that was some of the messaging, was there's an entry point for all of us to be a part of this revolution. But Vincent Harding was talking just very much from, as was on the Krista Tippett On Being podcast, from a calm, wise perspective, looking at not just cross-generational relationships, but across all of our sub-communities, and letting the people who are closest to all of these problems be the leaders of all of the solutions, because they are the ones who have the solutions. So in juvenile justice reform, criminal justice reform, and name any of the civil rights and social environmental rights we need to get going more deeply on, they should be the leaders of that part of the movement. So yes, I think it's reaching out to those folks who voted for him, but it's also all of us leading ourselves through the change that needs to happen next in everything that needs building.
All right. Well, listen, Lucy Gelman and Lara Herskovich, get some rest. Protest is exhausting. We're not 21 anymore, except Lucy. So thank you very much for joining us today. This has been Lucy Gelman, reporter at the New Haven Independent, host at WNHH Radio. Also in New Haven, Lara Herskovich, touring singer, songwriter, poet, activist, and juvenile justice reform advocate, and recording artist. That should be in there somewhere too. Before we take a break, I just want to tell you a quick story, because it's and it'll feed into the music we're going to end with. First of all, I want to tell you that we have no guest scheduled for the final segment. That's intentional. I'd like you to feel free to call in about anything you've heard today or anything else you want to talk about here in these troubling times. In fact, well, I'll tell you about that in the next segment if there's time. But our number is 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. So the thing I want to tell you about, because it just is, I thought about it when Lucy and Lara were talking. And then I noticed how we were going to end this segment. So last Monday, we reran this show we'd done in 2015 about protest music. And I decided, if you have to blame somebody, you can blame me. I decided we were going to open with the protest song of that moment, which was Hell You Talmbout, by Janelle Monáe and a hip-hop collective called Wonderland. And I decided we would play the entirety of it. And the entirety of it is more than 6 minutes long. But to me, part of the point of the song was it's 6 minutes long, or 6 minutes plus long. It's a recitation of the names of black people who had died in violent ways, sometimes from the guns of police, sometimes in other ways. And I first of all thought, cutting it would be like I'd be cutting the name of Emmett Till or something. That just didn't seem right. And also, the point of the song was to be noisy and assaultive on our eardrums and sort of say, pay attention. So when we reran it, I got this very angry email from this woman who said that she had it on in her office, and it was disturbing to all the people in her office. And she said, you shouldn't have played the full length of that. She called it the "Say My Name" song, and it's not the "Say My Name" song. It's what happens in the song. You'll hear it in a second. A little bit of it is you you hear the name of somebody who's died, and then they say his name or say her name. And so we went back and forth, and I explained my rationale for doing this. And she was not mollified and said, it was annoying. It got on my nerves. It got on other people's nerves. I was appointed to talk to you about this. You don't seem very receptive. And then I sent back something snarky. And then I don't know. I just said, what I said at the end was, I'd like you just to look into your heart and maybe sort of try to hear what's in that song and how it is people expressing their pain and their outrage. And that, maybe it doesn't sound to you like the way that you, because one of the things she, said, well, you don't even know who I am. I'm much more a person of the 60s and 70s than you're imagining. And, I know what that means, and I know what she's trying to say, but I said, I just thought, and it pertains to what we were just talking about here. Sometimes you have to look beyond your own aesthetics and sort of say, well, what is this other group trying to say to me? And can I open my heart to it and really listen to it? Anyway, we're going to end this segment with Janelle Monáe, once again from Saturday, performing the very same song.
That's what we're talking about. Remember, we must protect each other, and we must continue to choose freedom over fear. We can't give up. We can't be scared.
Betsy Kaplan and I were nominated to produce today's show, but we've not been confirmed by the Senate. Patrick Scahill and Betsy appeared in the intro, and our internist, Tasty Fisher. The part of Bill Curry was played by Marco Rubio. Catch up with everything we do on the Colin McEnroe Show Facebook page. On tomorrow's show, which future dystopia are we living in right now? And now, back to Colin.
All right, we're going to go to the phones in just a second. Our number 860-275-7266. 860-275-7266. And before I go to Billy in Middletown, let me also ask you a question. And you don't have to answer with a phone call. You can email me, colin@wnpr.org. I actually asked it on my own Facebook page, but you could also go to our Facebook page, The Colin McEnroe Show. One thing that we have to struggle with a little bit is how much we should focus on these turbulent times we're in, because our show does a lot of different things and we go in a lot of different places. On Thursday, we were very excited to be doing something that we really felt had never been done before, try to develop radio programming for the deaf audience that could be transmitted in American Sign Language. The first call we got was from somebody saying, why aren't you talking about the Trump situation? So one of the things we're wondering about is, how much do you want us to do with this? I think this week are in our rather unique way going to be approaching it from odd angles. Tomorrow's show, as you just heard, is about which dystopia are we living in. On Wednesday, we're going to do a show, which I expect to be somewhat controversial, about the notion that white people felt or feel oppressed and disenfranchised, and that contributed to the Trump wave of 2016. And Thursday, we're doing a show about Ayn Rand and whether or not she actually is a true intellectual force propelling any of this. But anyway, let's hear your phone calls about this stuff going on right now. Here's, as promised, Billy from Middletown. Hi, Billy. You're on the air.
Hi. I also have a head cold that's getting pretty bad. But, the other day I was getting so frustrated with the course of things, and I said, I have to do something. And I called up the Democratic National Party up in Hartford there next to Real Artways, and I got somebody on the phone, and you know what? There's a lot of important things going on. There's an election, I think, in February, the 31st district, but the person I was talking to was saying, and I agree with this, that local politics is the place to start. It's where the Republicans started, 8 years ago to make changes, and it worked for them, and I think I would feel good being able to do something instead of just kind of feeling bad about what's going on. So I'm going to do that, and I just figured I'd throw that out into the mix. So anyway, thank you for your show today, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for calling, Billy. I'll sort of double down on that and say local politics are going to be really, really important. Keep in mind that 2020 is a census year and therefore a redistricting year. So who has control of this, the interpretation of census data and the application of that to drawing district lines is incredibly important. It's very important, if you are from one party or the other, you really want to have hold of your state legislature and your state governor's office in a situation like that. You can read Dave Daly's book, the name of which I cannot say on the air, about how, in fact, the Republicans exploited in that technique as a way of gaining control over redistricting. All right, let's see. Let me grab a call from Betty in Voluntown. Hi, Betty. You're on the air.
Hi. So just want to identify myself as a white female who grew up in the second wave of feminism, who supported the Black Lives Matter movement somewhat, but not totally until I was at the rally on Saturday, and I heard that Say Your Name song, and it makes me emotional. I finally connected with that movement. So thanks for this opportunity to talk about my feelings.
All right. Well, Betty, thanks for calling in here. Let's go to, we'll stay with this. So we'll go to Mary Beth in West Hartford. Hi, Mary Beth.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for taking my call. Sure. I also wanted to say I loved that song when you played it last year and this week, and I was so excited to hear that in Washington. And everyone around, we were all singing to it. So it was so perfect, I thought.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thanks for calling in and sharing that. Let's go to Joe in Wethersfield. Hi, Joe. You're on the air.
Hi, Colin. I just wanted to bring in something regarding the Christian challenge of white, black, Democrat, Republican, whatever your creed is. But for Christians in particular, we have the belief that we are to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. And above that, and much harder, is to love your enemy. A lot of times, it seems like this past election, the parties became enemies more so than ever. And I think the love that has to be seen is in action. If you can't go out and march or express yourself some other way, the ultimate way that you can personally love your enemy and your neighbors is through prayer.
All right. Well, listen, that's going to probably be, I don't think I dare take another call. I will say the church that I attend right now is doing a series. I'm not a real fan of the verbing of nouns, but the series is called How to Neighbor. And so I don't know, I'll grant a mulligan on this one because it's an important concept. And so over a period of weeks, we are talking about that whole question of how to neighbor, how to be a neighbor to somebody who is different from you, who has a different faith, a different set of beliefs. And Joe's absolutely right. I mean, if you're going to take the gospel seriously, I mean, you pretty much have to start with the idea that the people that you find the most difficult are the biggest gifts to you, the biggest opportunity for you to discover some new reservoir inside yourself. So, and that's a very hard thing to do a lot of the time. Sometimes people you find difficult are just, people you would like to throw into history's ash can. Anyway, well, we'll be back tomorrow with Dystopias, assuming that wasn't today's theme.
Oh, you think this is the end of the show just because you're going to hear a promo and you're listening to WNPR, Connecticut's public media? You're clearly being fatalistic. I mean, you thinking that this is the end of the show says a lot more about you than it does about us. Now, on to the fourth segment of our show.